I guess my big thought is, how do you accelerate it? And how do you use technology we've built to accelerate the learning that we're experiencing? The great question is, does everybody have to get hit like Sandy?
This is Straight Talk in the COVID economy, and my name is Larry Quick. Our world has changed and there's no going back. The COVID economy is now very real. We are adapting to telework, Zooming, online learning and new industries like PanSafe and other opportunities revealed by COVID-19. The challenges are also with us: bankruptcies, unemployment, debt and confusion. In Straight Talk in the COVID economy, we meet thinkers and innovators who bring insight and information into the opportunities and risks of our rapidly emerging COVID economy. Straight Talk in the COVID economy is brought to you by Resilient Futures. This is alongside our partner, Impact Africa Network. Impact Africa Network is a non-profit startup studio in Nairobi on a mission to ensure young talented Africans have a chance at participating in the digital transformation of Africa as creators and owners. If grassroots change is something that excites you, visit www.impactafrica.network. By doing that, you'll be able to support as donors and mentors the Impact Africa Network. Hi, my name's Larry Quick, and I'd like to welcome everyone to Straight Talk in the COVID economy. And I'm very pleased today to have my good friend and colleague who I've worked with in the US on several occasions, Curt Spalding. Curt's with us today. He's Professor of Practice at the Institute at Brown for Environment and Society, IBES, and that's Brown University in Providence, Rhode Island. He's also obviously the principal at Spalding Climate Strategies, where he works with communities in the practice required to be climate ready, I guess, and he'll speak more about that. He's the IBES Professor of Practice, and he develops and supports a strategic framework that facilitates the civic engagement of the Brown faculty and students. He also teaches guest lectures as requested. So he's got a very, very big background. I worked with Curt, first of all, with Save the Bay in Providence, Rhode Island. He did some fantastic work with that. I think if you Google Save the Bay, you'll get a sense that it's one of the preeminent initiatives that has done a lot of work around not just saving the bay in terms of Rhode Island, but also in terms of practices that have been taken up by a multitude of different agencies and advocates. I worked with Curt when he was a regional administrator of EPA Region 1 in New England. And we had some really interesting times there looking at how the Obama administration was working with environmental protection. And that obviously changed very abruptly when the new administration came in under Trump. And we'll let Curt talk more about that. So welcome, Curt.
I'm glad to be here, Larry. Good to see you again.
Good to see you, mate. So today we thought we would cover three topics inside looking at social, economic, environmental aspects of the COVID economy and beyond. What we're seeing is the importance of people recognizing that there's no going back to 2019. In pre-COVID-19, we had systems that are already in collapse. They were social, economic, and environmental systems in collapse. And what we've seen, particularly in the Trump period from the US perspective, and I think it's impacted us globally through other populist leaders, is a drop-off in really understanding how we deal with climate change. So what we've dealt with up to 2019 is a really collapsing array of social economic systems right the way up to when COVID hit. Now that hasn't gone away. Then we've got COVID. And what we're seeing now is COVID is going to last 2 to 3 years as a norm. In terms of however you choose to deal with it, it's COVID normal. And that requires COVID economy thinking. Now, inside that, what we have is a range of different things that we've identified the collapse of the square meter economy, shoulder to shoulder industries, like people coming into big venues, etc., or even into restaurants. They're not necessarily being able to run the same business models as before. Social distancing has created that. We're also seeing the opportunities inside that with remote work and teleservices, digital saturation, or the acceleration of digital saturation. There's a whole bunch of things happening in that COVID economy. And what we're really keen to do, and this is critical for my conversation with Curt, is to look at the real climate economy. Because if there are things that we're doing and investing in the COVID economy, we have to make sure they link with the real climate economy. If they don't, they're a wasted resource. And what we're thinking about is the real climate economy is we hopefully we can make some sort of change and avert some of the really crisis elements of climate change. But we only have to look at the fires in the west coast of America and the fires in in Australia. We're looking at flooding. We're looking at a whole range of different extreme weather events taking place. So really what we're talking about is some type of prevention of climate change, but more so adaptation, changing ahead of change to deal with the real climate economy we're going to have to work and live in. So that's the three aspects of our chat today. So I'd open up my question to Curt would be, prior to COVID, what we worked back in Providence 2006, 7, 8, and then up in when you're up in Boston. What were some of the things that you were seeing we had the Obama change, you were working with the Obama administration, then you had the Trump administration, obviously not involved in the EPA, you're at Brown. Right. What were the things you were seeing in the US prior to COVID?
Well, I can talk about something I did some research on at Brown, or what became clearer to me transitioning from Save the Bay to EPA. And that is, while your big urban place, Boston, was thriving, no other way to frame that. I mean, at least economically, there were emerging issues of gentrification and displacement and systemic breakdown that was starting to hemorrhage. But Boston has a story. But the story outside Boston in New England, what were the foundations of the manufacturing economy in the world? All these small cities that I used to visit and see total social breakdown, right? So, take the cities I looked at in some depth. I took a close look at Bridgeport and Bedford and Providence, and just how over a period of time, basically 1950 forward, bottoming out probably around the millennium, they started to claw their way back out. But Providence had 200,000+ people in it in 1950. By 1986, it was down to 160,000. It was depopulating. The economy was hollowing out. The social problems were severe. The education system wasn't working very well. And that's still the case, right? That's still the case. And yes, our good friend Ken Payne used to call it managed decline. So all I saw across New England was a heck of a lot of managed decline. And from an EPA or environmental standpoint, you had a lot of land that was contaminated and in disuse. And how do we bring that back in? How do we give room to entrepreneurial thinking? It's kind of like the Detroit situation, but on a smaller scale. And I became fascinated with that kind of work. Towards the end, we did some fascinating things with something called Making a Visible Difference in Communities, trying to bring data to people and empower them with information so they could, work their recovery, work their adaptation to what's happened to them, globalization, disinvestment, all the systemic drivers that have left these cities kind of a shadow of what they used to be. And these were powerful cities from 1850 to 1950. I mean, the stories were incredible, and now they're just trying to find a way forward, and that's what I was fascinated with, and that's sort of the pre-COVID story to me, that you had a situation around Boston with the great innovation economies in the world, but then everything 30 miles outside or 40 miles outside was just not on that path. So that's the issue. And how do we emerge from that?
Yeah, that's an interesting summation, that the cities tend to be doing okay, but as soon as you get too far outside the cities, unless you're on a commute, and I'm thinking of,
well, I mean,
people who have gentrified some of those areas as dormitory suburbs as such.
Right. Well, Providence was a really interesting story of a civic effort to redo the infrastructure and move the rivers and make something beautiful. But they never got to the social level of that, right? Reworking the social. So the schools still were terrible, and the economy continued to struggle, and all the things you have to do never quite took hold the way it did in Boston. Boston, obviously, they did some big investments, cleaned up the harbor and depressed the arteries. And then something else happened, and magic sauce happened. But it never really, Providence was the second best case. And then everything outside of Providence, these smaller cities, I used to see Springfield, Holyoke, Waterbury. Man, by the time I traveled and visited every city in New England, I realized, wow, this situation is not sustainable socially. It just wasn't.
So it's interesting you say that, because when I was working there and had to rush back to Australia, given that I got sick, we had identified the global financial crisis, and it actually revealed itself when I was back in Australia. But and before that, even in Australia, it was the climate change was touted by the then Prime Minister as the greatest moral challenge of our time, is how we're going to deal with climate change. Along came the global financial crisis, and it was off the climate change was off the table. And I guess that from what I'm hearing from you, and Ken's idea of managed decline, we call that managed adaptive decline, as in MAD, where you you adapt to ever declining conditions, albeit in a very well managed manner. Right. You're saluting as you go down with the ship. But the madness, if I'm getting you right with the EPA side of things, that you're talking about, you have to deal with the social, economic issues alongside the environmental issues.
Yes. That was the emphasis on that point was what we started doing much better in the second term of Obama. So to pull your story into this, you came up and talked to my whole team of leaders. I think we had 100 people in the room at one point.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
And you were introducing a lot of what you're talking about, right? And it wasn't there for them yet. But as we moved forward with a really strong climate adaptation strategy, it wasn't just mitigation. The White House and the team said, no, everything you just said in the introduction. And they asked every agency to go ahead and look at all their programs relative to how climate change will change our programs. It's sort of the change ahead of change idea. Yeah. And they started bringing all that in. And it's been said that the president himself connected to some of this world you're part of, maybe not exactly your immediate group, but other groups that are sort of working with these ideas. And so we started seeing this stuff come down. And in fact, my most senior people came to me and said, oh, now we're finally getting it, right? We're sort of understanding that. And let's build programs for that. So I think in the second part of the term, we really started trying to figure out, well, how do we align with the Housing and Urban Development folks, HUD?
Yes.
Align these investments up. Work with a new group of mayors who's stepping into these challenges, and try to stop the rapid decline or the adaptive decline, and then move up from there. And it was, we were just scratching the surface, I think, to a reset of how the federal government sees its responsibilities. There was another project called Enterprise for the Environment, and the deputy of EPA said to all of us, look, there's a system of environmental protection going on out here. It's an enterprise. It's not an agency, no, it's an enterprise. There's 30,000 people working on this enterprise. How does this enterprise work? How does it work systemically? How do we make it work better systemically? How do we improve data, capability, capacity, all the issues, the kinds of frames you speak to? And I was very excited by that. I became very involved in that. I was the only regional administrator who would trump off to Washington and sit at these e-enterprise meetings. And even today at Brown, when under Trump, all of us who used to work for EPA, we've tried to reimagine how the enterprise would work going forward in a COVID economy, how it would be smarter, how we would use this digital saturation you're referring to make the process less burdensome and less costly. So the actual strategy of environmental protection is easier and more effective. I have a colleague named Cynthia Giles who's been writing she's a fellow at Harvard. She's really rethinking how you get higher levels of compliance. Compliance is the wrong word. Good behaviors. How do we design a system that without pounding on people with normal enforcement tools, gets them to be good behaviors on the environment, rethinking all of that. And so that's what's going on. I think it's, we're all sitting here, 20 days away when the reign of Trump may end. And then there's going to be this what now? The what now is really a fascinating question, because we shouldn't just go back. If we show up,
we can't.
And some people, I can guarantee you, there's some people close to this new regime that may step in who'll say, no, we got to go back to EPA being EPA and regulating and get the corporations out of the business and blah, blah, blah. If we do all that, it'll all be crap. Yeah. It'll fail. Yeah. It'll fail.
Yeah, I can remember your budget. I think at the time, up to your tenure, it was a large amount of it was spent on litigation, where you were being sued by companies wanting to do things. It's an important question that I think we forget that we had this opportunity back in the Obama days. It was there for the taking. That was like so many years ago. It's
yes.
Like the conditions have now changed to a point where we're closer to the decision points we need to make. So it can't go back to what we had with the EPA. Because my question was, how much did you spend on litigation as part of your budget? Because what you're doing in the early days, at least, is fighting business and corporate communities.
A tremendous amount of tension about that, right? So the early Obama years, it was all about enforcement and investing in enforcement. And then as things emerged, I can share this story. So we were going to, regulate again was the word. And we weren't, I don't know how to describe this, but I was in the New England region. New England region is much more collaborative. It's more of a European mindset about everything.
Yes.
Business, industry, government, that's why you thrived in New England, I think.
Yeah.
And we saw this was wrongheaded, and the guy who was my deputy, who was a brilliant man, 40 years in service, called up people and said, don't do this. We built these networks and partnerships to learn from how the private sector is moving sustainability frameworks forward. And you're going to just cut us all off? And the answer was yes, that's what they did. And then I invited a woman named Mindy Luber, who ran an organization called Ceres, which is this organization that works with Fortune 50 and tries to move sustainability values forward. And they all sign a compact, and she's very smart and all that. And she comes in and speaks to the whole region and says, I got to tell you, you guys managed to piss off every Fortune 50 leader in the country. They all are angry with you. They saw an emerging relationship around how this could all work, transitioning and working on sustainability together. And you told them to blow off, and they're mad. And of course, then the election happens in 2010, and we lose our majority in Congress, and then that's just, it was hell. I mean, the precursor of what came after that, the Trump election, was underway, and we were under siege, and why? Well, some of it is red, blue, polarization, all of that. Some of it was us just being stupid. We walked into it. We let them define who we were. And I just hope as this next thing starts, they're smart enough not to let that happen, that we're going to need collaborations with the economy, however you frame it. And to build this transition, the word is, you can speak to it better than me. When is it transformation, or when is it just adaptation? The need to adapt may lead to a transformation.
Yeah.
And I think you said 2025, you're right. Between now and 2025, we just got to get our feet under us again.
Yeah.
What is this COVID economy like? What do we learn from it? What are the tools we now have we didn't have? How do the pieces of what was that square two economy, shoulder to shoulder, the pleasure of a good meal with other people, well, how does that get recovered at some point in whatever? But then you're right. This transformation has to really take off to a place where by 2050 we're essentially not making the problem any worse, and then we can start some kind of stabilization of a way to live where a lot of it's not you. I don't know if in Australia you have been able to sort of feel this summer where these protests and Black Lives Matter and the raising of outrage about what this we called systemic racism, but whatever, this racist history of this country is suddenly confronting us, and it's everywhere now. I watched this show called Lovecraft Country on HBO, which is really it's right in your face. They go back to Tulsa and explain that. Okay, we got to come to terms with that too. We have to come to terms with the fact that our climate is, we're building a world that is not very healthy for us to live in. And then we got to come to terms with the fact that we haven't addressed a sin of sorts to make this country thrive in this next century, this 21st century. If we don't, it's going to be it's not a great future. And I have children, and I don't want to. I'm not pessimistic. See, I think we can meet that challenge, but
it's going to take some work. Because you said 2050, but I'm not too sure if you meant that, but we see it as 2025 because the emissions targets that have to be met by 2030 before it's totally out of control have to be met.
What I mean, depending who you talk to, 2030, we maybe get there 2040, but we got to stop the bleeding by meeting those emission targets.
Yeah. So what we're seeing is that we've had this pandemic. So pre-COVID or up to 2019, say for instance, chronologically, we were stopped in our tracks socially, economically.
Right.
And that obviously has that drop off in performance has created a whole bunch of disorientation, confusion, complexity, because they're like, well, how do we get this social economic to work? It's almost like the environmental side is once again, it's like after the global financial crisis, the great moral challenge of our era was lost in fixing the economy, and now we're back into the same sort of thing again.
Yes.
This has this case that if everyone's working from home and they're not using their cars as much, and et cetera, goes more digital, et cetera, what we've got is a relief to a certain extent to the economy, to the environment, from a climate change perspective.
Yeah.
But I think it's important that now that we're looking at the COVID economy, and this is something that's occurred in 2020, and we've had the real complexity and confusion of how do we deal with it? What do you do with a pandemic? We've never had a pandemic like this before. We're globalized, we're connected, we're a whole bunch of things that supply chains, et cetera. Luckily, we had the digital side so that we could get that digital acceleration towards saturation, so that digital supply chains can keep going.
Yeah.
People can reorient their organizations in some shape or form, work from home, et cetera. So, we're in this space now. We see it as it is an economy. If we had an information economy, a knowledge economy, a creative economy, we have a COVID economy. And that's the way we're actually talking to it, that it is a different facet to the traditional economies of industrial, agrarian economies, et cetera. It's not that they've gone away, but things like the square meter economy, commercial rents are not a good business model anymore compared to what they were. Also, you have the shoulder to shoulder, as my friend Mark Zawacki calls it, is a really important thing to understand, that if you go to COVID normal and open up, you still got to social distance and wear a mask.
Right.
You can't have more than 10 people in a restaurant that should take 50. They're real, you can't go to big.
Yeah, it doesn't work, right.
So even if you open up in COVID normal, you've got a COVID economy that you're going to have to deal with its inherent business models, its enterprise models. So in that, as you were saying before, in this new administration, the possible new administration post-Trump is going to try and go back to an EPA of the past. What type of, we've talked a little bit about collaboration, et cetera. If we're to say we're going to spend $10 trillion on stimulation of an economy, what do we invest in a COVID economy? If every barista has lost their job, there aren't as many people, selling coffee or cake or whatever, or hospitality's changed, but we've also got PanSafe, as we call it, a whole new industry around pandemic safety, where you've got teleservices and you've got micro manufacturing with smaller supply chains, all of these things happening. How do you see some of the things that are inherent now in a COVID economy being able to link towards a real climate economy?
Well, the thing you call digital saturation, which was just starting to emerge. There was a project in Massachusetts that was fascinating in the last couple of years before Trump, and I don't know if it's continued, but I presume it would. So we were working on this idea that Internet of Things sensors will be very powerful for monitoring environmental conditions, right? So the whole enterprise of environmental protection was just so rudimentary compared to the way some people were thinking about it. Well, if we could get sensors into across the board, I'm an advisor to a startup, a kid from Brown, and his sister, and he's 22 and she's 19, I don't know, and he's a genius. So he's built this. He wants to disrupt the whole world of environmental water monitoring with a sensor technology and do it cheaply because he can write the code and has the machine learning know-how to allow you, let's say you live on a pond with your neighbors, you've depended on the government to know whether your water is healthy or not, or whatever, how well it's doing. One thing I know is that most people care about whether that ecology they're connected to or see is healthy. But that, I mean, it's not noxious, it's not green, it's not, it's got fish in it, and it can support fish. That's what people like. So there's going to be a whole explosion of this kind of technology that the COVID economy now is accelerated. You say now everyone has a computer and a Zoom and a this and a that. So when my friend David Liu writes code in machine learning to be able to literally visualize how that pond is doing because of his cheap sensors, that's a big change. That's democratizing environmental condition. And we talked previously about conditions. And if people are more connected to the condition of their environment, I believe it's a core biological thing about people that they want their environment to be sustaining them healthfully, right? Our economy and all our philosophy may have somehow, our religion somehow has separated the human condition, human system, or human well-being from the environmental thing, right? Whatever mindset of industrial growth created that, it's still held in some quarters. I don't think that's sustainable. I think actually people understand and know that the planet sustains them. So the more you can, I see this coming in a big way, this big drop of, okay, we can put a lot more data into people's homes about all that. Air sensing's gotten really cheap. So what's driving a lot of the environmental justice work is inexpensive air sensing. The EPA's great failure is we managed air quality on a macro scale. We have 2 big sensors in Providence. Well, that doesn't tell you whether the air is good down on Elmwood Avenue. Well, now we can do that cheaply. So what's emerging is, okay, and now COVID has accelerated, again, the digital saturation you're talking about. Well, all this digital stuff was coming. Now it's accelerated. And I don't know what that all means. All I know is it means if you're going to do environmental work going forward and you've been hired by Joe Biden to scheme it out, you should be thinking about that, not thinking about how we did it 10 years ago when I first joined the Obama administration. You should be thinking about these young people who are setting up these sensor networks and empowering everyday people with this information and what they will do with it and what they can do with it in their community and how they can reach out to the business person up the street and says, well, those diesel trucks you have, not so good for me. We need to move to the hybrid trucks, or we need to move to the hydrogen trucks quicker. Back to your point about getting to 2030. We got to get rid of these diesel trucks, and not only because it's good for the planet, but it's good for me. I'm breathing the goddamn stuff. That empowerment is right there. It's right there if somebody wants to nurture it and validate it and accelerate it. And that's the opportunity. And it was there before COVID. We were talking a lot about this before COVID. This was the emerging practice area that I was excited about. The last year I was at EPA at Brown. I work with something called See Ahead, which is a incubator for blue tech. So we can do a lot more with ocean tech and sensors and the like, and how that all comes to today. I mean, that's the optimistic part, but it's going to look very different than, EPA writes the rule and everybody follows the rule. That's not it anymore. Because we'll never regulate diesel trucks down to the neighborhood scale. That can't be done. But you can measure your air quality at the neighborhood scale and realize that the business up the street, and we have one in Rhode Island, a company from New Zealand actually called Sims, which takes scrap metal,
Yep.
piles it on shorelines, and then they have diesel trucks bring it to them.
Yeah.
And then they'll sit there and spew emissions, and that affects asthma for thousands of kids in South Providence. Well, now we can know that, right? You can know that.
It's interesting you say that because, you know, we're in lockdown in our offices here, and we've got a big balcony up the front. We're in lockdown for 6 months. So we've got a kitchen and bathrooms and all that stuff. And we were, two of us at least, were sleeping in the office, and we've got several rooms here. The room I'm in at the moment is the studio. But we would notice in the mornings the trucks from a quarry that's cut for villages over, or
Right.
would come down one street and up our high street. And I would say I didn't realize they did that. And they were prolific in the morning. And our balcony has to be cleaned every week because it gets dusty and dirty. And I was like, I'm not too sure where this dust and dirt comes from. I know where it comes from now. And I was thinking, well,
yes.
how do we get that change to occur? And what you've just said to me says, you know, let's just put some air sensors on there and look at where that comes from, because there is trucks that to get to a village a bit further away from us, they come through our village. They don't need to.
Right.
They could go a bit further along the freeway and cut in and not go through the high street. But, you know, I see that model of, democratizing environmental conditions so people are aware and they get feedback, you know, such as the pond and the water and the air sensors. That as an industry, if you think about that under the banner of, as you've talked about, enterprise for the environment, which I love. I mean, that just has got to be one of the catch cries in the COVID economy, enterprise for the economy. And it's about, you put it so well, it's like building a world healthy to live in. It's not about, we've got to save the planet, you know, it's like the planet doesn't need saving, you know. And I agree with you that when people say to me, we've got natural systems, we've got human systems, I think, well, that's the biggest mistake of the environmental movement, is to take human beings out of their natural environment, which is the earth, alongside of a lot of the animals that have been around, other species that have been around, well, maybe for as long as we have, to a certain extent, you know. And I think we you know, at least forms of our species survived the dinosaur era. So, like, you know, we're an older species than a lot of other species if you go back in time. Now, that's not putting us above other species. It's saying that we're part of the whole system. So, you know, the planet doesn't care about us. You know, I'm afraid to say that. You know, you can sort of say, oh, it's a lovely planet. Well, it doesn't care about us, but we should care about it, because we've only got one at this point in time. And I don't really fancy my kids or grandkids or great-grandkids living on Mars. So, you know, we've got to do something about it. And we've got this moment in time of the COVID economy to invest in that, rather than investing, like you're saying, the EPA, go back to litigation and regulation. What do we invest in now to be able to get into the future? What practices? And I think that's what you're saying, I think, is practices that are really fundamental, where you can build new capabilities, new industries, and, you know, being able to provide something as simple as water feedback and air sensors.
So, you know what I see, what's really interesting is I see two kinds of students, right? Two kinds of young people. There's more than that, but there's the ones who are going to march in the streets, you know, who are organizing, who are, you know, they're politically minded. But then I see that, like, this kid I mentioned who's inventing this water sensor, and who has command of this digital technology. Yeah, I dare say, Larry, you and I don't have command of it.
No,
you know,
not technically.
Command it.
No.
And then when you think about this data flowing around, and now the ability to connect people with Zoom and these other tools, the process of connection is accelerated. It's just so much faster, right? Old days, we'd have to call a meeting.
Yeah.
It takes weeks to call a meeting.
Yeah.
Now we call a Zoom, it takes 2 hours.
Yeah.
Tomorrow.
You don't have to travel 1,000 miles.
Yeah, these kids are connecting. This little group that I'm talking about has traveled from working with Cargill in California to they're now in Minnesota in what's called Techstars to starting in Boston. I mean, they're just like, I just look at them and go, how do you guys connect to all these opportunities? And, you know, there's another thing in Florida. They've got people all over the world looking at their thing, and he's 6 months out of, he's not even 6 months out of school. So there's that acceleration thing that's going on. The other thing that I think is a practice innovation that's really exciting is what we call consequence modeling. So the tech to model what does it mean for the ocean to rapidly warm off of New England? Well, storms are going to get more, we're going to have bigger storms. So I apologize for the dog. So
that's fine.
That dynamic brings consequence. Well, how do you engage in the consequence? Well, then there's a team at URI that's looking at buildings and where different infrastructure is within buildings and putting all that data into a model, and so you can model consequences about the way buildings are built, and then you can go back and reinvest in those buildings. So that part is really the next step that I'm involved in, is this consequence modeling. And again, where I fear though, and this is the big problem, the behaviors of the social, the political is just so entrenched. There's so much damn inertia at the government level, local government level, state government level. How do you break that inertia? You know, you bring all this good stuff forward. Will they realize they have to think and operate differently to affect the change that we all know is necessary? Like, we're going to have to take every oil-powered building in Rhode Island and turn it into heat pumps. How do you do that, right? That's a big challenge. So, yeah. I don't know.
When you say that inertia that's there in government, you know, I could always remember a phrase I learned from our friend Kip Bergstrom about sclerotic government, you know,
yes,
where they're in this state of moribund. They're just locked up. And it's, you know, it's sort of like not sure what they should do, not sure which issue to work with. The complexity, they're not designed. It's not that they're not good. They're not good at it at all. But they're not designed to really deal with complexity. And you only have to know that by, you know, the way that, say, for instance, the EPAs of the world, you know, environmental protection agencies occurred in that they were set up separately to other institutions. So you had an EPA that was set up, you know, as some sort of, you know, administration said, we'll have an EPA at a federal or a state level, whatever it may have been. But that the economic development department carried on doing the same stuff, and the social services department carried on doing the same stuff. The transport department carried on doing the same stuff. Exactly. The urban planning department carried on doing the same stuff, and somehow the EPA, which has to think in terms of whole systems, wasn't able to do that. And then also, you know, you remember some of those meetings we had in Providence where we brought, you know, the diverse groups of people in, developers, you know, we're looking at Narragansett Bay. We brought developers in with town planning and urban planning. We brought in, you know, Rhode Island School of Design and Brown University, yourself, etc. We had all these people sitting in a room, and some of those people had met each other before, because they'd been to something, but they never sat down and talked about what are the conditions that are impacting the Bay. And
Right.
so they all understood each other's perspective and gave a whole, what we call a shared context for decision making inside the complexity. So, you know, and I remember our friend Fred Presley, who was working at the EPA at the time, said, you know, this is the first time he's ever seen anything like dealing with the different social, economic, environmental, transport, energy, community knowledge, the aesthetic, you know, all of those things, sense of place, never before. And it just makes sense. And that was in 2006. Now, I guess my question is to you is that if it's not government, who can have those types of conversations again as we work towards dealing with the real climate economy? Who's best in America right now to do that?
Well, that's a great question. Well, first of all, I want to say that the work you were part of, I still refer to when I talk about the kind of integration that needs to occur. Kip had a cool name for one of those reports that was written, and it's still there are still people like me who refer back to that work and say this is where we need to go. You know, we need to go there. Unfortunately, the economic development agencies have become more siloed and more transactional as the decline has continued, right? So you have a declining situation, you try something, it doesn't work in 2 days, it doesn't work instantly, and you abandon it, and then you try something else. And it's like a sports team firing the general manager every year when they don't win immediately.
Yeah.
You know, it takes time to build that, right? So who could build that? Well, that's a great question. I see networks emerging, okay? So the New England, the Business Council of New England is having these kinds of catalytic conversations, right? More people are joining. It's not just business people who are joining now. NGOs are joining because their content is really good. And they're bringing business innovators to the front to talk about some of the things I just talked about. So that's good. The smarter, there are catalytic people in government who are creating these sidebar conversations. I always had to laugh at EPA. I had two types of people. I had the old classic people, usually lawyers and permit writers. And then I had this group that was like saying, oh man, why are we building these old wastewater plants continually? There's a whole bunch of new tech out there we should be pushing towards. And they were having catalytic conversations with universities and NGOs, sort of freelancing. So I think that's where it'll come from. It won't come through government in the formal sense, but there's, at least when I was in government, there was these freelancers. So these people who kind of operate in the networks. And we had one working on food and trying to move food policy. So we stopped wasting so much damn food, and so much of it ends up in the landfills. I had one person, but she used to connect all these people together, and I'd go to these meetings, and there'd be all these things going on. And then the state of Massachusetts decided they were going to divert all the food away from landfills. Well, we got something done there, right? So where did that come from? Well, that came from a lot of conversations and meetings of NGOs pre-COVID, so that people were doing it in face-to-face. I do worry that kind of catalytic dynamic it doesn't really work in the digital Zoom context. I don't know, because there's a certain trust that comes to seeing, people coming together and saying things. But, crazy things like the Patriots got on board with this, and started diverting all their food from the stadium, right? And sending it to homeless shelters. So great things get done sometimes with this informal actors, but it does, usually somebody is paid in the government sense that they don't have to raise all the money for what they do, and they've got stability. They're there for 10 years. the NGOs have to raise money and they have to chase the latest, greatest. And sometimes they don't get there from here.
It's difficult, for NGOs who survive on largely survive on grants and grant applications. And so rather than being proactive in funding, they tend to be reactive to what a granting organisation wants done. So,
yeah.
you tend to find that they're focused on one part of the whole system. So, most of the stuff they do, particularly in America, given that your whole social services system relies on not-for-profits and NGOs. In Australia, it's different. We have a social safety net that's driven by the government, and we pay tax for that to occur, even though there are. And I think the one thing that I think we're saying, I was talking about before, that I found, having worked, I spent 10, 11 years living and working in Europe, mainly in the United Kingdom. And then I obviously spent 20 plus years, and more than that now, working in Australia, and lived in different states and worked in different states all over Australia. And then I've worked obviously in a lot of the states and spent a lot of time, that was nearly 8 years or so in the US. And if I was to look at the difference that America has an individualistic, you can be great, you've got to find your own way up, and everyone's equal and everyone can get their own way up. And we're in Australia, we have what's called a fair go, and it's being eroded to a certain extent, but a fair go for all. And we're more of a social democracy. We're not, we're capitalists guaranteed, but we actually are quite happy to have our healthcare system paid for by taxes largely, and you can have private health cover if you want. But, I had cancer, and I can tell you, when I came back, I was given the choice. You can go, I had private health insurance. I had health insurance in America and said, no, if I've got leukemia, I'm coming back to Australia.
Yeah.
And I was offered, you can go to a private health a hospital, or you can go to a public hospital. I chose to go to a public hospital because it was a teaching hospital, and they had some of the best thinking in there, and it was a public hospital. Now, I went in as a private patient, and I was supposed to get a room by myself. I didn't at times get a room by myself because they'd say to me, look, there's someone in the public system and they're really stuffed up. You don't necessarily need to be in a private. I was in there for 6 months plus. So I'd say, take my room. I'll go and sit with the guys. I'll go back in the ward because we can have some fun. But and the only thing I really got was free parking for all the costs. Got free parking as a private patient. But, and I'm happy about that. And I think, we'll talk about what we call dole bludgers or social security frauds and all that sort of stuff. But largely speaking, we're pretty okay about that. And the reason I say this is because what I found, like you guys and living in America, that there's such a community feel that you can have, like those things when we used to be at New Commons, where you bring the community. Right. So vibrant. And, but I do see that state of, you can grow, it's up to you as an individual to grow. And if the social safety net, doesn't, it's pretty scant. But, I'm just wondering, because like, if I remember Save the Bay was started by a lady in Westerly, was it? Or,
yeah, in Jamestown. Tiverton, right. That would be Louis Surfy, yeah. Tiverton.
Yeah. So, one lady starts Save the Bay, and then you spent, was it 17 years?
Yeah, my run was about 18 years. The thing I tried to do is and again, you were part of this, is realize that that there's a system here. That it isn't just a matter of the federal government says this will happen, and then we enforce it happen, and then build the wastewater plant, and all is good. One, the ecology is much more complex, and the social system connected to it is much more complex. So, we're going to have to educate kids. We're going to have to get volunteers in the field. We're going to have to physically restore habitats. We're going to have to be more scientifically sophisticated. This isn't a dumb game. There's no room for it. This is a beautiful system. Estuaries are beautiful, and so let's treat them that way. Don't simplify the conversation too much about what you need to do. Some environmentalists thought the communication challenge was keeping it simple. I said no. The challenge is getting people to appreciate the beauty of the complexity of it. Yeah. And once we did that, I think things have changed. I think at the core, there's this tremendous appreciation. I don't know whether you know this, Larry, but every couple of years it goes to ballot whether you're going to invest billions, tens of millions of dollars in the Bay. And we get the highest vote totals from the poorest neighborhoods in the city. Wow. So in Providence, the minority communities vote the highest for the investment, knowing that's probably going to affect their rates and their taxes. And they have no money. So that's the magic, I think, that I like as a practitioner, try to capture and then turn into real action. And that's the hope I have around climate, when people finally really, really get it, which is what you're talking about, the 3 years of COVID and then the next year or two, and can some of what we learn to do in COVID be used for that? And then action would emerge, and the diesel trucks become hydrogen trucks, and we got to transform the electric system. We got to transform the heating system. They are doing work. I mean, to be honest with you, Larry, I've participated in a lot of cool stuff called heating transformation, transportation transformation. People are articulating paths forward, but how we disrupt the political process enough to get there. Biden's talking about it. I'll say that. But your point is we can't go back. Absolutely. We've got to figure out how to get all this data immersion meaningful to people. They're comfortable with it. They see it as reality in their lives. That at a core level, that can happen. I think we're in a place that can happen. I don't know. I'm never optimistic or pessimistic. I just think we got to do something.
Exactly. Optimism and pessimism for people who've got nothing else to do. And
I just saying, if we can do this, there's a path forward to this. If I can work with these guys at Woods Hole, I've introduced this idea of consequence mapping, modeling to them. If we can assemble this enormous grant, we can be talking. Then I'm asking myself, how do I talk to governors? Well, I can connect through the Coalition of Northeast Governors. Well, how do I do that connection? How do I make it high touch and real and trusting so they pay attention to the information? Those are all the how-tos that I obsess on, and when I have the energy to do it.
It's interesting. Your direct experience of, someone decides to and looks at the Narragansett Bay, which for those people who don't know where that is, it's the bay that it comes in via Newport, Rhode Island. Everyone knows Newport, Rhode Island, where Australia stole the America's Cup from.
Right.
It's still, there's still visages of it there today. But, it started there, and then it became something that you took it towards. And I always remember just being in awe of Save the Bay as an exemplar of what's possible when someone in the community says, let's do this, and years later it becomes what it is today, more than just something that is about saving the bay. So I guess what I'm saying is that, if we go back to the premise that we are in a COVID economy and we're starting to invest in that economy, we've got to make sure that it links to a real climate economy. And we've got a certain amount of time to do that. We've got at least 2 to 3 years of sorting COVID out, not COVID normal, but we'll be in that post-COVID economy, but we have to be thinking about real climate economy at the same time. And, I don't know. There hasn't really been too many big fires in Australia yet, and we're into nearly to mid-October. That's sort of like last year. It started in August in New South Wales. So
Yes.
we've been a bit saved, but like we know that the fuel loads in a lot of the unburned areas are double what they were when big fires happened years ago. So we've got this bomb waiting to go off, and we're meant to have a lot of flooding this year, even in our summer. And don't forget that Australia is tropical in the north, and Arctic in the south, virtually. But so we've got this period of time to invest and understand. I think my situation is like saying to people, it's your choice, because you can choose to do this or choose to do that. You can choose to create a real climate economy, or you can be part of creating that real climate economy, or you can just adapt to what is going to happen and not do anything about it. But you've got to know what to invest in, whether it's
right.
a of change to make sure the climate is better for us as it is now, or are you going to invest in the way it will be, which is if it's going to be 10 degrees higher, you can't drink milk in Australia anymore because you have to import it because the cows won't make milk or whatever that's going to be. I'm not saying that's absolutely correct. But, just understand that's what you're going to be dealing with. So, your choice in this real climate economy is there for you to make, but make your investments now, because you can't double invest. You can't go, oh, well, we're back to where we were, or we're back to this, or whatever it was. Holy shit, it doesn't work in the real climate economy, which is,
so that's
got to make that decision now for 2025 to make sure we've got ourselves clear by 2030.
right. So in this period of COVID economy normalization, as you've put it, I keep coming back to this investing in how we bring this information related to the climate future where we own now. We own a challenge. This is the fact that we do own it. I mean, there's a tension point, right? We need to invest obviously in decarbonization, and there's a lot of paths forward for that. And those are pretty well laid out, actually. I just saw, I'll send it to you, a link, an MIT model that kind of says, well, we do this a big efficiency thing, and we do this thing, we can get to where we need to go. Invest in forestation, efficiency, and in renewable energy, we will decarbonize. And they have a model, and they've got functions behind it, and it's really cool, it's really graphical. It allows the average person to sort of see the path, so they can see the path. That's important. So I would say investing in being able to see the path in this next couple of years, so people know what to do in the next 5 years that you're talking about, the period to 2030. Yeah. So that's important, and I can share that. But the other part, I think the adaptation is more challenging, because it's harder to see that path, right? Yep. It's harder to see what leaving the coastline will look like. So I think we need to invest in how the change is coming, invest in the relationship building that allows people to have trusting conversations about the future we're headed towards, so they can be trusting to each other as we do these very difficult things. Whole neighborhoods in Rhode Island are going to be underwater. I mean, we're very low. Nobody's come to terms with that conversation yet. One town has. It's fascinating, Larry. One woman who's the town manager in Warren, Rhode Island. Warren, Rhode Island, dug into all this, and she's educated her leadership, and they're literally planning for the relocation of all their businesses to Metacomet Avenue, which is kind of a I don't know if you have this in Australia, but we have this in the US. We have these dilapidated strip mall areas where suburban, when the 50s and the 60s during suburban growth, you had these little strip malls.
That's right, yeah.
business, and they're sitting fallow. Well, we have businesses down near the water that are thriving, but they can't stay near the water. So she's actually literally having conversations and planning about how to move those businesses. But she's built a interesting relationship with everyone involved, and she speaks around to meetings when we still could do meetings. And Kate Michaud is her name, and she's so impressive.
What's her name, Kate?
Kate French Canadian, Michaud, I think is Michaud. I'll send it to you. But her wisdom, if you talk about investment, it's investing in people to act. The question is better to ask Kate, who's actually doing it, right? Yes. As a manager, and saying, okay, I realize my wastewater plant won't be viable 20 years from now. So I'm talking to people about that now. And I've told the government that's the last investment I'm going to make in it. You're not going to make me invest anymore because it's not viable 20 years from now. Let's get real. And she's speaking back to power that way. And she's very, and the thing about her is she's not some radical anybody. She's just a person. She was a planner. And that's the kind of path I'm thinking on, is how do we get more of her going?
Yeah.
And I think a lot of it is really good visualization modeling, using this digital technology we have, these young people who know how to make VR work. Fascinating project in Rhode Island that you should be aware of. RISD went down to Newport to that really rich section called the Point section. It's very low. And all these old dowagers live there, 80, 90-year-old women with tons of money. And they put VR, the VR thing on their head and said, this is it, And it's very troubling because these are historic homes and they're of great value heritage-wise. No great solution has emerged from it, but it's an investment.
Wake up call.
As these tools emerge, as digital saturation, as you describe it, faster internet speeds are being implemented everywhere, so we can use these Zoom methods. Better routers are being installed in everybody's homes. I mean, all of this is happening. So that's kind of where I'm going, or been going. I continue to go there. It's the thinking I'm doing, working with these scientists at Woods Hole, that they're going to create great science about the future of New England based on how fast the ocean's going to warm. Well, how the hell do I get that into the community of decision makers as trusted information? How do I do that? That's what I'm going to invest in the short term, in the COVID economy period. I presume we'll get into that next period and we'll have to invest in people leaving, and that sort of thing. But those investments come when after the first storm. So we just had 2 hurricanes hit the exact same place in Louisiana.
Yeah.
I don't know. And they accelerated very quickly to category 3 and category 4. I mean, the pace, the big phenomena as these storms used to roll in and accelerate. No, they boom, they explode into the warm water. Go from tropical storm to category 3 in like 12 hours. And they blasted this place twice. And the bottom line is, at that point, people have had it. They got to leave. They just don't want to do it anymore, right?
Yeah.
So that's the other investment, I think, is there was a great book called, I have it right here, called The Rising, by a woman at Brown now, who went and talked to communities personally. It's a type of literature where it's nonfiction literature, but it's a story told about communities who are coping with climate change. And she really is, this book is a must read because it kind of gets down to the very personal relationship and understanding that. And the fact is, in places that are experiencing this severe stuff, there's a willingness to leave and not come back, unlike Paradise, California. Will it burn again? I guess forest fires burn, and maybe they're safer for some period of years, but not with the hurricanes. They come and come and come and come.
Yeah.
So that's a book that's I'm influenced by, and thinking about investing in how these conversations occur and people get ready for the change, ready to change. As you say, what do you say? Change before change, or change
ahead of change?
Change ahead of change. Share those stories. That's what I would do, and I think it's happening. I do think it's happening. How do you I guess my big thought is how do you accelerate it? And how do you use the technology we built to accelerate the learning that we're experiencing? The great question is, does everybody have to get hit like Sandy? Why is Rhode Island acting like Sandy, Hurricane Sandy that went through New York and everything changed down there? People left neighborhoods in Staten Island, left them. There's a story in her book about hundreds of homes. People decided, we're done, we're leaving. Do we need to have a storm to do that? That's a major question. But can we get to a place where people start to realize, let's change before change. Let's realize this isn't sustainable. I have to get out of here. The property tax, the collapse of property taxes might do that. The collapse of property values might do that in advance. We don't know. Financial collapse.
Maybe a signal.
That's coming. Sheldon Whitehouse and Senator Jeanne Shaheen from New Hampshire just wrote a book about that likelihood that the financial system that sustains communities now will collapse first. And that collapse will be so disruptive that these cities and towns along the coast realize they have to do something. And will government have property taxes? Taxing property is it's been the way we've always done it in New England. Well, that doesn't work. How do you tax property when property's losing value?
Yeah.
Doesn't happen.
Yeah.
Well, that's why our cities are in the shits.
Yeah.
Because they used to be big manufacturing centers. You tax the property, then the property value of it, because of contamination, declines and money. Yeah. So that kind of disruption is the other thing that we invest in, is how to take that disruption, use it going forward.
So that's like leveraging.
On this East Coast time, what time is it in Australia?
It's 10:58 and time to wrap up the interview. Because I'm just noticing that you're most probably getting called to dinner, given
I am.
7:58, nearly 8 o'clock over there.
I was barking about, come feed me.
The dog, feed me. Well, Curt, mate, let's hope that this is our first conversation of many. And it's so great to reconnect. And there are some of these things that I'd really like to talk about, and won't talk about them on air, but to get those connections happening again. But let me say thank you so much to Curt Spalding.
This is really fun, and I do think what you're talking about is really important. That this, and I haven't dealt as seriously as you as to what's this COVID experience really mean, and so this has been helpful to me. And then hopefully I can share some stories about what's emerging around how we accelerate learning so that the changes can happen in a nice way. I don't want it to be like the way some of your lockdown for COVID scares me, because then the people who've done that think, well, I can make things happen on climate change. I can make people do this. Well,
no. Well, great. Thanks, mate. And we'll hope you have a great dinner and a great rest of the week. We're about to go into our summer. Enjoy your winter.
Yeah, and anytime. If we do maybe a big Zoom event where we can talk about this with others, that'd be great. Thanks.
That's fantastic. And stay on for a second. But thanks so much, Curt.
Thank you, sir.
We hope you've enjoyed this Straight Talking the COVID Economy podcast. Thank you for listening. And please subscribe on your preferred podcast platform. For more free content that will enhance your understanding of this new COVID economy and the actions that you can take to leverage disruptive change, join the Resilient Futures Network at www.resilientfutures.com/get started. And please support our partner, Impact Africa Network, at www.impactafrica.network. We need all the support we can to help them build their own incubator. We know that there are many other great podcasts out there, and your time is precious, and you chose to listen to Straight Talk in the COVID Economy. And we appreciate that. Thank you.